If you have a Bible, I want to invite you to turn to the Old Testament book of Jonah. If you don't have a Bible, we'd like to give you one. We've got Bibles that are out in the lobby. All we ask is you read it. And it's yours for free. You know, the older I get, the more I appreciate my mom, who's passed away, and the sacrifice and the service that she gave. And I know that many of you feel that same way. And as I was preparing for the message today, I thought about those times in my life when I rebelled to my parents, because this is what the book of Jonah is all about. It's about a rebel. It's about a runner. The most notorious, infamous runner in all the Scripture is Jonah. And his story is our story, because all of us, as we talked about last week, all of us at some point in time in our life have run from God. We've done it overtly, or we've done it covertly, or we've done it secretly, but all of us have run from God. And so what we talked about last week, we talked about how there are common characteristics of great runners, and we looked at some of those characteristics, and we saw that that was true of all of us. Now, you may remember Jonah was a prophet who lived about 750 BC. And he was one of those guys that was instructed by God to go to a certain people and to tell them that they need to get their act straight. And if they didn't, that God was going to destroy them. Now, normally, as we talked about last week again, normally prophets of Israel would go to kings of Israel. But Jonah had a more difficult job. His job was to go to a pagan nation, a non-Jewish nation, and to talk to them. And of course, Jonah, as we learned last week, said, God, I know what you want me to do, but I'm not going to do it. And he ran. He ran from God. He ran from the calling of God. So let's look at the map again. I showed it to you last week. This will remind us of what was going on with Jonah. You see the map here. Here's Jerusalem. And Jonah went down to a port city named Joppa, and he boarded a ship. Now, Nineveh, where God had called him to go, was 550 miles by land. And he said no. And we learned that instead, Jonah bought a ticket to a city called Tarshish, which was all the way in Spain. And he got on this boat, and we know that his adventure on that boat was tumultuous. Y'all want to see the boat again, by the way? All right, let's see the boat. There we go. That's cute, right? And he gets about halfway there out in the middle of the sea, and storms arise, and bad things happen, right? The sailors throw him overboard, and he is swallowed by fish. The Bible says a great fish. And inside that fish, where we left off last week, in chapter 2, verse 1, the Bible said inside that fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord. And we all say, I bet he did. Because we would have too, right? So I want to share with you today this distress signal that Jonah sent out, this prayer that Jonah sent out as he was inside the fish. And I'm calling today's message S.O.S. because he was sending out a cry of rescue to God. So this prayer, as it's contained in chapter 2, is in prose form. It's a poem, basically, or a psalm of some kind. So Jonah has this experience. He gets out of the well, and later on, at some point in time, he puts down in poetry form his prayer, what he had prayed when he was inside that fish. And this prayer illustrates two ways that God expresses His love to runners. Two ways that God expresses His love to those who are running from Him. The first way is grace. Grace. This is found in the first part of chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Grace. God gives grace to runners. Now, most of you are familiar with the biblical word grace. Grace means undeserved favor. There are three terms, really, in the Bible that have to do with kind of punishment. Okay? One of those words is the word justice. Justice is getting what you deserve, right? Any kind of just judge would give to criminals, to those who are found guilty, what they deserve. That's justice. But then there's something else, not justice, but mercy. Mercy. Mercy is not getting what you deserve. You deserve something, but you didn't get it. Now, grace, on the other hand, is altogether different than justice or mercy. Grace now is getting something good that you didn't deserve. Undeserved favor. It's like the child who got in trouble with his dad, okay? Justice would have meant he got sent to his room, got grounded. Mercy would have meant he didn't get sent to his room and did not get grounded. Grace, on the other hand, would be he went and got an ice cream with his daddy. That's grace, getting something good that he didn't deserve. Now, it's very hard for us in our human capacities to imagine that though we have sinned and though we have done wrong and though we have even run from God, He would show us undeserved favor. But this passage illustrates exactly that He gives generous grace to runners. So look in verse 1. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. You bet he did. And he said something that every generation has said in every language. Every runner who has ever lived has said this. Look at these beautiful words. In my distress, I called to the Lord, and He answered me. From the depths of the grave, I called for help, and You listened to my cry. That is powerful. Very, very powerful. I mean, isn't it true that what drives you and me to pray sometimes when we're running, isn't it true that what drives a runner back to God is their distress? And we have prayed those prayers of distress. We have sent out S.O.S. signals to God. In those most desperate of moments, when we cheated and got caught, when we were in the back of the police car, when we had to pick up the phone and say something to somebody before they found out from someone else. You and I have been in those situations where we've had to pray to God in our distress, and we've said, "Oh God, please listen to me. Please help me." And what's funny about this is no matter what you believed about God up until that point, no matter how slick you were, no matter how cool you were, no matter what theology that you had, no matter how smart you thought you were, people in their distress, people who are at the end of themselves, cry out to God and beg for mercy and beg for grace. And what we learn from Jonah is that those who do, this is what's truly amazing. Those who do find that God listens, that He is merciful, that He is gracious. So, I get people that come and talk every once in a while, and they're talking about a runner in their life, a spouse or a child or something like that, and we bow for prayer. We pray for those people. You know what I pray? I pray for misery. I pray for hardship. I pray for pain and challenge. Because only then, for some people, only then, when they reach the end of themselves, only then are they ready to cry out to God. So amazing grace here. And look at how gracious God is. He listens to the cry of those who are running. God listens to the desperate cries of desperate people who are in desperate circumstances, even of their own making. Even as a result of their own choices. God listens. But here's what we think. And I know because I think this and have thought this. Here's what we think. We wait so long and we keep on running. Because in our minds, what's going on is we say to ourselves, how could God take me back? I've manipulated Him. He's answered prayers at times in my life only for me to turn my back on Him again. I've committed to Him only to fail, only to run again. I've told God to mind His own business. How in the world could He take me back? But God listens to runners who give desperate cries of help, who are desperate and are in desperate circumstances of their own making. That's amazing grace, folks, and we need to remember that today. And so what this teaches us is this. It teaches us that no matter how far we've run, no matter how far we've strayed, The story of Jonah is a story that illustrates for you and me that there is a constant and daily and maybe even moment by moment reminder that we are always welcome back to our Father in heaven. Grace. Grace. That's one way that God expresses His love to us. But there's another way that God expresses His love to you and me who are running from Him. And that word, that way that He expresses His love is discipline. Discipline. Now this creates a tension in us, doesn't it? Because most of us would rather prefer the grace than the discipline. Most of us are much more comfortable getting something that we don't deserve, something good that we don't deserve from God, rather than discipline. But in verses 3 through 7, this tension of God's grace and discipline in the life of Jonah is illustrated. And so let's read verses 3 through 7. Look in verse 3. You hurled me into the deep. Jonah is having a moment of clarity. It wasn't the sailors. It wasn't the ship. It wasn't the storm. It wasn't the sea. You, God, hurled me into the sea. Jonah had one of those but the Lord, now the Lord, then the Lord moments. You hurled me into the deep, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight. Yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. The well sunk deep into the ocean. And Jonah felt it. Jonah knew it. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. Everything that was in the belly of that fish, Jonah experienced. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. Jonah thought it was over. Jonah thought he was dead. But you brought my life from the pit, O Lord, my God, when my life was ebbing away. 3 days, 3 nights. Can you imagine? Some of you have maybe seen the movie 127 Hours. Seen that movie about the guy that gets caught rock climbing, gets his arms stuck? He's there for 127 hours, day and night. I don't know what that is. Was that about 5 days or so? It illustrates the turmoil, the physical and psychological turmoil that he went through, eventually with a dull knife cutting off his arm so he could be free from the rock. Now, there are some people believe that the story of Jonah is metaphor. It's a nice story. I believe, we believe, this is a literal story of a real man who got swallowed by a really big fish. And he's there for 3 days and 3 nights. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord. And my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. So now, in verse 7, this prayer illustrates that Jonah is now kind of a changed man. He's received his wake-up call from God. And he's received that wake-up call because of the pain and the hardship and the challenge that was in his life. It was the ship, it was the sea, it was the storm, and now it's in the belly of this great big fish. And Jonah is a changed person. But I want you to know that Jonah has changed. Jonah has called out to God, not out of his comfort, not out of his prosperity. He is called out to God out of the adversity of his life and out of the challenges and the discipline that God has brought his way. And I want to remind you that discipline is just as much a part of the love of God as His grace. If you're a parent, you inherently know this to be true. If you're a mother, you know this to be true. The way that we express love to our children, just as God expresses it to you and to me, is by His loving discipline. And remember that loving discipline is not to pay us back. It's not to get revenge. He disciplines you and me out of His love to win us back and to bring us back to Him. Now, this idea of God's discipline is found all throughout the Bible, but I want us to turn to a New Testament passage, Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. And I want to read a text from Hebrews that states with clarity God's role in our lives with respect to discipline. Hebrews chapter 12, beginning in verse 7. This is what the writer of Hebrews says. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. For what son is not disciplined by his father? If you're not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are illegitimate children and not true sons. Moreover, we've all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. And those of you who are a little more advanced in age, you teenagers are going, yeah, right. Those of us who have gone along in years, we look back and we absolutely respect our parents. We respect our father for the discipline that he brought our way. You know, when I was a kid, my dad would spank us. And you don't need to send me any emails. I'm okay. All right? I haven't had to have counseling about that, you know. I'm okay. But he would spank us with a belt. It wouldn't be the buckle, okay? It wasn't abuse. It was with a belt. And I told my daughter that the other day, and she was like, what? She thinks it's like child abuse or something, you know. With a belt? Really? And, you know, how big was the belt and all this kind of stuff. So, those of us who have had that kind of discipline, and those of us who practice that kind of discipline now, and those of us who wish that some of you had had that kind of discipline when you were children, know inherently the love that is expressed when you discipline your child. We know that to be true. And I tell you what, when my dad disciplined me, it changed me. And after a while, it was just the sign of the belt or the warning of the belt. Okay, Dad, I'll do it. I give up. You know, I'll go. I won't go. I won't hit my brother. I'll let him hit me. I'll do whatever you want because I didn't want the discipline. Now, again, those of us who know this principle understand that it is wise and loving for a parent to associate rebellion with pain. Because rebellion leads to pain. And I'd like for my children to get the pain inside the context of the home rather than out there someplace where it could be much worse and the lesson's much harder. We know this to be true. God disciplines those He loves. Let's read on in this passage in Hebrews 12. Verse 9. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of our spirits and live? Our fathers disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us to pay us back? To get revenge? No, for our good, that we may share in His holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces something. It produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. The truth is that you and I, more than likely, have learned the most powerful lessons in our lives, not out of comfort and convenience, but instead out of pain and hardship. And you could look back, you could rewind the tape, and you could say to yourself, the most life-transforming time that I had in my life, when I was absolutely in distress, and when life was at its lowest. And it wasn't something that you learned, it wasn't something that somebody told you, it wasn't a lesson that somebody taught you, it wasn't a Bible verse that you memorized. It was a painful, difficult experience that you walked through. And when you got to the other side of that experience, you were awakened to some realities of life that you needed to learn. And you were reminded, hopefully you were reminded of God's loving presence and His step-by-step process of bringing you back through it all. You see, the truth is, folks, we don't learn when we see the light. We learn when we feel the heat. We learn when the pain of our decisions is worse than the pleasure of our decisions. And that's the way that Jonah was learning. So let's go back to the book of Jonah. He's a changed person. It's not based upon knowledge. It's based upon his experience. And so the truth is this. Discipline is a sign of love. And I want you to wrap your brain around that because it's really hard for us to get it. And when we say to our kids, I'm doing this because I love you, they may not get it, but you know inherently what that means. Not when you're doing it for punishment, but when you're doing it for correction, when you're doing it because you love them and you're motivated by that love. How much more is our Father in heaven motivated by love and the discipline that He gives to you and me? So here's the deal, though. Here's the deal. And this is the whole sad part about running, in my opinion. Is that for many, they have the experience of pain. They have the experience of hardship. They have the experience of the ships and the seas and the whales. They have the experience of discipline. But they miss the meaning. They miss the meaning. And they blame it on other things. And they perpetuate the running until they finally reach the very end. Now, the next verse, verse 8, that we're going to look at here, the next verse describes really the point of this whole poem by Jonah. The next verse describes the dilemma that every person running from God experiences. This is the truth, and this is the beauty of this passage. This is my favorite part. In verse 8, look at what it says. Jonah has realized this. Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. So we've talked about grace. And Jonah has come to this realization. Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. Because when you run from God, by default, you run to something. And in the process of running to that something, something has replaced God. Think about it. You're running away from God, you're running to something. And that something has replaced God. It may be an opportunity that you feel like you just got to have. It may be an expectation about life. It may be a lifestyle. It may be a pleasure. It may be a person of some kind that you're running to. And as you're running to them, you're really replacing God because you're running to them and not to God. You're running away from Him. And so, Jonah realizes for him and for every runner that has ever lived, when you get to that destination, when you get to that place that you're running to, after all that running, after all that striving, after all that achieving, after all that manipulation to get what you want, Jonah realized that what he had pursued was not worth what he gave up. That what he wanted so badly, when he got it, was not worth what he gave up. Because in the pursuit of this thing, in running away from God, he had forfeited the grace of God. And it wasn't about God's willingness to give it. It was about his unwillingness to receive it. God was always there. God is always giving grace. But in running from Him, we forfeit it. We let it go. We miss the opportunity. We've abdicated the very thing that God had wanted provided. Now, it's really that simple. It's really that simple. Runners tend to build a lot of complexity in their lives, a lot of justification, a lot of rationale, a lot of reasons for what they're doing. But it really is that simple. You're either running to God or running away. It involves a choice. And Jonah came to learn that all that running, all that stuff that he had pursued, all those things that had replaced God, were not worth it. And he had given up the thing which satisfies the most, the thing that which fulfills the most, and that is the absolute love and grace of God. And you know this to be true. when you lay your head down at night on your pillow and you're staring at the ceiling and you're honest with yourself. You say, nothing is greater than God's love in my life. And the peace that comes from that love. You know why I know this to be true, folks? Because in your distress and in my distress, when we've reached the end of ourselves, we don't cry out to those things that we pursued. We don't cry out to the successes that we gave our lives for. We don't cry out to the people that we've run to. We don't cry out for the opportunities that we now have achieved. We don't cry out for them. We cry out to God when we're at the end of ourselves. And for some, we don't realize that God is all we need until God is all we have. And as a loving Father in heaven, He will strip away everything from you and me so that He might replace that idol, that worthless idol, Jonah said, that thing that is a substitute for Him. He might replace that with His love and His grace. But here's what many of us have to learn the hard way. We often don't learn this until we're absolutely broken. Then we have clarity. Then things are much more clear, as was true of Jonah. Now, let's read to finish up the chapter. Verse 9. But I, with a song of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed I will make good. Salvation comes from the Lord. And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. A pretty graphic word, isn't it? He burped, and out came Jonah onto the dry land. And then if you look in chapter 3, verse 1, then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. And what do you think he did? He listened. And he went to Nineveh. So this story of Jonah in chapter 2 is a daily, moment-by-moment invitation that God's grace is always available, that we don't have to continue running, and that what He provides for you and me is worth far more than anything else that we could replace Him with. And I wonder if you've learned that. I wonder if you've learned that. Maybe for some of you, you've come here running. And you're just kind of bouncing through church and on your way out to run some more. God has brought you here because He loves you. And His word to you is stop running. Stop running. I'm here. And my grace is available to you. I want to invite you to bow your head as we close our service today. I want to invite you to bow your head, close your eyes, and I want to ask no one to look around, but I have a sense, and I've just had a sense as we were planning this message series, that there are some runners in the room.